I had to do a lot of research to find anything that is an empirical fact and not just a formal argument. You see, a formal argument is a part of philosophy. With a formal argument comes a burden of proof. If you claim there is an ocean and point at an ocean, I've got reason to believe that there's an ocean because I see it there. If you recite that same argument and then you point at a desert, well, I'd probably shake my head and laugh. The so-called pro-life movement has not met the burden of proof. They point at a desert using an appeal to emotion and hope no one looks and just believes what they say. The pro-choice movement is about whether or not a woman has the right to terminate a pregnancy, nothing else. We are talking about a legal issue that concerns a woman's right, period.
Okay, so one of my friends posted a question on Facebook about a really contentious topic that I think requires a lot of thought and deliberation and a lot of, maybe not even time, but just a space to actually think about it clearly without it being supercharged and, through little sound bites or through people responding in a paragraph or two. I think it requires a lot more than that, and it's worth a lot more than that. So I'm going to attempt to respond to my friend Sean Maddox about his question on abortion. So I'm going to paraphrase, and Sean can tell me if this is an honest version of his question. So the question was about, I don't understand, critics of basically the critique on abortion because, for instance, in rape, why would we force women, like in his instance, he said my wife or my mom or whoever, or my daughter, my potential daughter, to carry the pregnancy. And I thought it was such an honest question because he actually wanted feedback. And so I really do applaud that because my son's standing on his head. Hi. Because most people have their minds made up about this, right? And it's hard to enter into this conversation because it is really an emotionally charged issue. And so I'm going to attempt to do that. And I want to do that under my 3 basic steps in having these types of conversations. The first one is I want to be as charitable in ascribing a positive and pure motivation for people's arguments as I possibly can. So I don't want to attribute malice to people's arguments or misconstrue their arguments. For instance, a pro-choice argument because I just want to make them look bad. I think that's dishonest, and I hope that people don't do that to me either, or any pro-life people, or what I would consider myself an abortion abolitionist. So I want people to believe what I say, even if they disagree with my conclusions. So I want to do the same thing. I want to take and look at pro-choice arguments from an honest perspective and not based on me, like some type of character assassination. The second thing that I want to do, and I have done, is I've listened to pro-choice arguments again and again and again and again and again. And I have gone through these different scenarios and asked myself, okay, is that a legitimate argument? Why or why not? What did they say their reason is for believing this? And then the third thing is I've clarified with people who are pro-choice and asked them, is this what you believe? Why do you believe this? And in doing so, I've realized that there is a really wide spectrum of people who are pro-choice. Some people are kind of the trope that the right, the political right, portrays them as. They want abortion on demand. They don't care if the baby is born alive. If they're supposed to be aborted, like kill the baby. And I mean, some people are stalwartly, they strongly hold that view. But most people that you're going to run into do not hold that view. They want some types of restrictions on abortion, and they don't believe in abortion on demand at any stage in pregnancy. So again, I want to make sure that I'm portraying that argument as honestly as I possibly can. Okay, so I think that the first most important thing to identify is what the definition of abortion is and what abortion we are talking about. So if you just look up abortion online, you'll see that there's two types of abortion. And I'm not saying medical abortion, I'm saying there's two basic ideas of abortion. They're spontaneous and induced abortion. And I think sometimes people who are pro-choice do, and I've seen this happen, purposefully conflate these two ideas. There is no moral quandary with spontaneous abortion. Just in the same way that if someone was involved, I'm sorry. If someone was involved in an accidental death, that isn't a moral, that you're not morally blaming someone for that. But in induced abortion, you're specifically targeting an embryo or fetus, the destruction of an embryo or fetus. Okay, so what we're talking about is induced abortion. That would be the targeted destruction of, and this word is thrown around a lot, pregnancy. You're not destroying the pregnancy. I mean, you're destroying the embryo or fetus. Like, it's not like the embryo or fetus was collateral damage and they just happen to also be terminated. No, the whole point is to terminate the embryo or fetus. And I'm trying to use as objective and non-charged language as I can. I'm purposely not saying baby because everyone gets up in arms about that. I'm not saying person because people get up in arms about that. So I'm trying to use language that we can both agree on. Thank you so much. That is cool. Okay, so let's find some ground that we agree on. What is it that most people on both sides or within the spectrum of agreement and disagreement, what can we agree on? I think what most people I found agree on is that human life is valuable.
I don't believe you. It's irrelevant to the topic of abortion. It's an emotional argument in a video about a non-emotional case for being pro-life. Also, given the other premises, it's limited to fetuses, not women. So it's fetuses are valuable, not born humans.
Okay, that's actually one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, is because both types of people, if you kind of set up these like stereotypical pro-life and pro-choice people, both believe that human life is valuable. They don't think that it's just dispensable, that anyone should just be killed for any reason, or any life should just be taken for any reason. Okay, so that's a common ground. Okay, then the next question would be, okay, who is human?
This is irrelevant as well.
I don't think the next question is what most people pose it as. Well, not most people. A lot of people, just a lot that I've heard in these arguments. The next question is, who is a human, not who is a person. Okay, I think that distracts from the argument. That's more of a philosophical question. Okay, who is a human? Well, scientifically, if we're going to go down that route, it is an objective reality that a human life begins at conception.
Irrelevant.
Okay, your life didn't begin when the sperm half of you was created, or the egg half of you was created, or when your mother ovulated, whatever. Your life began when fertilization occurred, when conception occurred.
No, wrong. I don't believe you. and irrelevant as well.
Okay. I haven't really said anything controversial.
None of your premises are controversial to educated people, yet you're using them in a completely different, separate topic.
Even though there may be people all of a sudden they're like, no, that's not when life, okay, that technically is when a new life begins, okay? So you can bring in other pieces of the argument, whether, okay, had to change scenery because I had to feed one of my kids. Okay, so we established, or at least I established, when life begins.
No. A process starts after people had sex. It turns into a life form, eventually. But initially, it's not life. It just consists of organic matter of a maybe-to-be life form.
Okay, so from the reason why, and I'm responding again to my friend's comment on Facebook, and he knows I'm making this video. The reason why there's an argument against the legalization or the moral goodness of abortion is because just like we would defend anyone else's life, ideally, just like we would defend the taking of anyone else's innocent life, we do the same for any human at any stage of development.
No, innocent is an appeal to emotion, and it's irrelevant when it comes to abortion.
We do not discriminate on the basis of age, any type of age.
Withdrawing consent isn't discrimination. By that logic, not consenting to being raped would be discriminating against rapists that want to harm people or have sex.
All right, so that is fundamentally the reason. Because a unique human life begins at conception, therefore the defense of that human life should start at that point and carry through till the end of the life.
Humans are not unique. There are 7 billion humans. In fact, people's character isn't even unique because they share mindsets and experiences. But those are characteristics of born people, not something that won the genetic lottery and may or may not end up as a viable organism in up to 9 months. So it's another irrelevant point.
All right, now we get into possibly some of the counter arguments and what I think is the prevailing counter argument in the pro-choice movement. I think that the prevailing counter argument in the pro-choice movement isn't primarily when life begins, when human life begins.
Well, I don't know why you had to waste 10 minutes on it then if it's not part of it.
Okay, I don't think that is the strongest or the motivating argument. I think the motivating argument has to do with autonomy.
Okay, then why did you waste 10 minutes not talking about it?
Bodily, what they'll refer to as bodily autonomy, a woman's choice with what she does with her body. Okay, so before we get into the depths of that argument, I first want to address something that was explicitly stated in my friend's post on Facebook.
So, why switch topics after 10 minutes of not going into the most important topic, which is why women choose abortions?
What was explicitly stated was the argument, if my wife or mom or potential daughter, whoever, is raped, why should they have to carry out that pregnancy? So I would respond with two things. The first thing I would respond with is I don't know why we are using 1% of abortion cases to legitimize abortion.
Because those 1% represent thousands of women. They would lose that option. But if bodily autonomy is a valid reason here, then why isn't it valid in other cases? Actually, how many women must be raped for abortion to be legitimized for all women? Are the 1% not enough?
to me, that's not a cogent argument to say, okay, well, there are around 600 plus thousand abortions a year in the United States. If 1% of those are based on rape and 0.5% based on incest, let's just focus on rape. If only 1% is based on rape, or the reason given is based on rape, then that means it's about 6,000. 6,000 abortions are based on the reason given is rape. Okay, I think the second issue with bringing a rape as a reason to justify the goodness and morality of abortion is, and don't mind the line on my head, I just got out of lab, is I think it's an error because it's responding to an argument that the pro-life movement doesn't make. And this is what I mean. When you say to someone, well, abortion should be justified because look at rape. First of all, it's an exception to the rule.
Rape is an exception to the rule? What rule? The rule to outlaw abortions? Well, if valid exceptions exist, that means it's not a black and white issue.
But second of all, you're saying that because it wasn't the woman's intention to get pregnant, or because they were violated, I mean, horrifically violated. Yes, I understand that. Because they were violated, they shouldn't have to take on that responsibility. Okay, but the argument from a pro-life standpoint and from what I would call myself an abortion abolitionist standpoint isn't that primarily that people need to take responsibility for their actions, because obviously it wasn't the woman's action that put herself in that position to be violated and abused in that way.
When women consent to sex, that doesn't mean they automatically consent to being pregnant. In both cases, bodily autonomy is the same valid reason to choose an abortion.
But again, that's not my argument for the defense of life at any stage of development. My reasoning is that we affirm that we should defend life at every stage of development, because a unique human life starts at conception. So how that life starts is actually irrelevant. If it starts through incest, if it starts through rape, if it starts through consensual sex, again, I'm not saying that all of those acts are morally equivalent. I'm not. I'm saying that the life that is generated through those acts is equally valuable. Absolutely equally valuable.
It's not a life yet. Value is subjective. It's not equal considering the fetus must be preserved at all costs, and the withdrawn consent of the women doesn't matter. Women have no value here, according to this line of arguing.
So the rape argument would, again, only make sense if the pro-life argument was based on personal responsibility for actions. But it's not. It's based on the fact that life begins at conception. So regardless of how that started, that's still a life worthy of defense. There's a category of other discussions that we could go down about how to care for the woman in that situation. And I think those are extremely valuable and needed conversations. How there's conversations that need to be had about foster care and foster youth and about adoption agencies. There are but those are tangential arguments. They aren't directly related to whether or not the taking of a human life, even an incipient human life, is morally acceptable.
Wait. Gotta stop you there. Skipping bodily autonomy, not really addressing the emotional trauma that rape victims suffer through, sometimes for life? Not addressing unwanted pregnancies, especially for underage victims who create a bond when giving birth, but then they're forced to hand over their baby to foster care or adoption, but suddenly invoking morality in a conversation about abortion and non-emotional case for pro-life? Talk about missing the important topics. Still no mention if women should have a right to their own body. It sounds more like rape is no good reason for others to choose an abortion.
Those are conversations that need to be had, but they actually should not be what we use to determine the goodness or morality of abortion itself. Okay, so this is how I see it. There's the two major opposing arguments. From the pro-life standpoint, life begins at conception, because human life begins at conception, because we're talking about humanity, and human life at every point of development is worthy of defense.
This does not describe a pro-life position, because it's always centered around a collection of human cells that are not a life form yet. They are only life when they are viable, not before. It's a pro-forced birth movement who also partially worships a genocidal tyrant and are pro-guns. For it to be a pro-life movement, they'd all need to be vegans, be against guns, and not worship a faith-based deity that condones violence in any form.
Okay, and then from the pro-choice movement, what I think, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the most powerful argument that they have, and the one that they stand on the most, is that women should have bodily autonomy, complete bodily autonomy. They should be able to control what happens to their bodies, and no one else should control that.
Yes, completely separate from the 15 minutes of this video.
So, if you stand on the pro-choice side and you say, yes, we should have complete bodily autonomy, and you don't have a response to the pro-life side that says human life begins at conception.
The pro-choice movement does have a response. Bodily autonomy must come first, because the definition of life from the pro-forced birth movement is flawed. In essence, the pro-forced birth movement wants to force women to remain pregnant against their will, violating bodily autonomy. It's that simple.
And you acknowledge that human life begins at conception, then you must concede that life, maybe depending on stage of development, but still, listen to my statement, that life is subservient to bodily autonomy. That bodily autonomy is first, is number one. Or you must at least concede that life at certain gestation is subservient to bodily autonomy. That bodily autonomy is up here, and life, maybe at some stage of development, is down here. Now, the pro-life position would say, no, the defense of life is a higher priority than bodily autonomy. And there's no way to change that, to flip that. And our argument would be, there is no way to argue that an earlier gestation makes you less valuable, just like any other type of development, child development, makes you less valuable just because you don't have the same thought process, just because you can't reason the same, as a 1-year-old. That doesn't actually make your life more dispensable. So my question then, if I have correctly evaluated the main, I'm not talking about all the counterpoints, but the main point from the pro-choice movement, my question back then would be, how do you evaluate the value of life?
Why ask this at the end? This should have been the first and only question in this video before claiming we all agree that human life is valuable. And where is the bodily autonomy discussion that you were supposed to be discussing in the 5 minutes earlier here?
Do you think that life at earlier gestation, a human life at earlier gestation, we're not talking about personhood, we're not talking about any of that. Do you think that life at earlier gestation is more dispensable? And how do you reconcile that? All right, that's what I'm gonna put out there. Welcome to responses, and let's talk about it.
The big problem pro-lifers can't understand is abortion is about ending a pregnancy, and that's it. The consequences of that termination of a pregnancy are separate and irrelevant because the choice and welfare of the women who decide to terminate a pregnancy must supersede everything else. A fetus has no rights. No legal rights, no right to using someone else's body. They can't use someone else's body to survive. A person already born does not have those kind of rights. Now why would we grant someone extra rights if they are supposed to be equal rights? They are trying to make laws based on their feelings which have nothing empirical to back them up. DriveBYE out.